Hello, welcome everybody to Book Passage Live. My name is Zach, and I'm so thrilled today to present this event to you. Just want to let everybody know that we're here today to talk about Father Figure with Jordan Shapiro and Ted Bunch. Father Figure is a thoughtful and long overdue exploration of fatherhood and masculinity in the 21st century that Adam Grant says redefines what it means to be a good father. Jordan Shapiro is the father to 2 children and stepfather to 2 more. He lives in Philadelphia with his partner, Amanda Steinberg. He teaches at Temple University's Intellectual Heritage Program. He's a senior fellow for the Joan Gans Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop and non-resident fellow at the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution. His previous book, The New Childhood, received wide critical acclaim and is published in 11 languages. In conversation with him today is Ted Bunch, who is the co-author of the new book, The Book of Dares, 100 Ways for Boys to be Kind, Bold, and Brave. He works for A Call to Men, helping men and boys promote healthy manhood and prevent violence and discrimination. Ted works with professional athletes, business leaders, and activists. He lives in New York City. Thank you both so much for being here today. And if everyone is enjoying this event, please like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions for our authors throughout the event, please go ahead and put those in the YouTube comments and I will relay them to the authors. Thank you again both so much for being here, and you can take it away.
Well, thanks for having us, Zach. It's great to be here.
Yes, Zach, thank you.
So, Ted, I think we should just start by introducing ourselves, don't you? Before we even get into the conversation, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about what you do at A Call to Men and who you are and how you got into the work?
I appreciate that, Jordan. Thank you. It's great to be here with you today. And hello, everyone. My name's Ted Bunch, as mentioned, and you see my name there, my pronouns. And I founded the organization actually 20 years ago. January will be 20 years. My friend of mine, Tony Porter, and I actually founded the organization 20 years ago, and we're still running the organization. Tony is the CEO, and I'm the Chief Development Officer. And I would highly recommend anyone who likes TED Talks to watch Tony's TED Talk that was done about 10 years ago, actually. It's got about 5 million views. GQ magazine said it was one of the top 10 TED Talks every man should see, and we really love it. So I'm plugging it because that gives a great overview kind of about our work at A Call to Men, because it still is very much important as we address the issues in our society, whether it's fatherhood, manhood, raising our boys, and so forth. So who I am, I'm also a father. Jordan, you and I spoke a little bit more about this. I know you have 4 children. I actually have 6. 3 of them are biological. 3 of them came to me later on as they were teenagers. They're all in their late teens or in their 20s now. So we have a big family. It's multi-racial and also throughout the gender spectrum, actually. So we have a good time and learning about each other and about the world through those 6 sets of eyes that we have. And I know that our work at A Call to Men is, the vision of the work of A Call to Men is to create a world where all men and boys are loving and respectful, and all women, girls, and those in the margins of the margins are valued and safe. And we're very intentional about saying all women and girls and all those in the margins of the margins. So then we're not just thinking center, we're thinking margins. So that means Black trans women are really important to these conversations, right? When we look at manhood, masculinity, sexism, heterosexism, homophobia, it's all connected. So I came to this work through, I ran the largest domestic violence program in New York City, about 600 men who batter every week. It was the largest in the country, and I did that from the late 90s throughout the early 2000s. So that's how I've come to the work. And I'd like to ask you the same thing, Jordan, actually. Can you share a little bit about who you are and how you came to this work?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first and foremost, I'm a father, like you. That takes the majority of the attention space in my head, and then I somehow have to fit everything else in at the same time. And the everything else is I'm a college professor. I'm an educator. I work with young kids at Temple University. I guess most of them are adults, not even kids. I also do a lot of research, and I'm an author, and I'm a public speaker. All of my work has been around thinking about how we make sense of our world, the language and the ideas and the images that we use to make sense of our world, and how we can think about changing those ideas in order to make it a better world, changing our habits of mind, changing our thought structures to envision something something better. Long before I did any of that, though, I was a cook. I worked for many years as a line cook and a chef. I even owned a diner at one point. And it was. I mean, I love cooking. I did not like cooking professionally. If we had many more hours to talk today, I'd tell you all about the amount of misogyny and harassment that it happens in restaurants. It's way better than it was when I was in the business, but it's still the worst business in the country when it comes to it. It's the majority of sexual harassment claims, and that statistic didn't surprise me at all when I read it, because I learned a lot about how to treat people when I did that job, and I had to unlearn a lot of the bad habits that I learned in that job. And that's probably how I got to writing Father Figure, at least one piece of it. Because a lot of people hear that I wrote a book called How to Be a Feminist Dad, and they think it's a book about how to father daughters, which is not surprising that people think that. We have a very binary way of thinking about gender and sexuality and social justice in this world. I was going to say the country, but it's the whole world. But no, the book was really for me, who at the time when I started writing it, I only had two kids, my two sons, and I was a single dad. I hadn't yet gotten remarried and moved in with my stepchildren. But it was really about how do I model what it means to live a life of radical inclusivity, so that my kids model it. And I started it with, I came through the lens of gender, although I think I could have come through many other lenses, but it just happened to be the thing that I had done a lot of work on in my life. But it could have been a father figure, how to be an anti-racist dad. It could have been a father figure, how to not be, how to be anti-Islamophobic. Any of them are the same, because ultimately this is about modeling radical inclusivity for young people, and looking at yourself and recognizing the places where you might produce problematic structures for the people you love and the families that you love. But I do want to say one thing about it. What I wanted to say is, actually, I want to ask you something about A Call to Man, because one of the things I've always loved about A Call to Man, which I think goes very I think it resonates with what I was trying to do when I decided to write Father Figure, is that A Call to Man has always framed this not as an indictment of masculinity, not as a criticism of manhood or man, but very much as I think the words you use is invitation. It's an invitation, not an indictment. Is that the?
That's right. Thank you. Yeah, it's we know that. You know what? Before I go there, Jordan, because you said some things earlier, I just want to pull some things out of there, man.
Okay.
I was taking a couple notes, because I want to ask you some questions about this, because I definitely want to get to where we're going, right? But you brought some nuggets in there.
It's fine with me. Fine with me.
Talking about radical inclusivity, which I love, right? And that's where everyone belongs, right? There's a sense of belonging everywhere. And, we talked earlier about our pronouns and how important it is to put them up there. Look, I know what my pronouns are. It's just not for me. It's for the world. And the world might see me and assume my pronouns are he, him. And so that's not the point. The point is about making what's invisible visible. That statement, you having he, him, me having he, him, says, oh, well, then it's not a binary, right?
Right.
Because there's a spectrum here. So I love that radical inclusivity, and that you're a cook, man. I can't just jump on that. That's wonderful. And also you mentioned about, when you talk about the service industry and the sexual harassment and unfairness in the service industry, because when I mentioned earlier about the margins of the margins, that's the margins of the margins. That's those service folks. Many aren't even on the books. They're working, for tips. There's so many different things. The power dynamics are incredible there. So I just really wanted to appreciate that and your courage to become a cook. I wanted to be a chef. When I was in high school, man, you just didn't do that. We had a home economic class and we just didn't have, no one was in my life to say, yes, go do it. I was going to go to the Culinary Institute in Hyde Park. And because of this male socialization that says that's outside the man box, right? And so you do something else. So anyway, I didn't want to skip through all of that. So I hope you don't mind.
That's okay. That's okay.
So the work of A Call to Men, as I said, we've been doing this 20 years, and just like the father figures, coming from a place of, it's a perspective and a spirit, right? Of this is not an indictment on manhood. It's an invitation to men to be differently, to think differently. When we look at gender, when we look at patriarchy and sexism and male dominance, it's everywhere. It's in the air that we breathe, right? It's like the hum of the refrigerator. You don't hear it unless you pay attention to it. Then you're like, oh, the refrigerator, you assume it's on. And then, you get closer, you can actually hear it. And so we're all swimming in the same water. So whether it's sexism or racism, right? In the last year, a lot has been exposed to well-meaning white folks about what systemic racism is. So this isn't to blame anyone. We've all inherited this, and the same thing with sexism. We've inherited it, right? But now that we know, we have to move through the world differently. I have male privilege, there's race privilege. And now that we know that, we have to move through the world with that knowledge. So it's not an indictment, and it's not even about calling men out, right? It's not about that individual man who does that thing that we don't want him to do. It's about calling men in, right? Because it's really about that individual man is just moving through this world. He's been created by what you said earlier, language, ideas, images. That's socialization, that hypermasculinity, the sexism, the misogyny, the objectification, the treating women as less value and girls as less valuable than boys, and seeing women as the property of men, and teaching our boys and learning ourselves as men that women are objects. These are not true things, but this is our socialization, how we pass it down. So we come through, when we talk to men, and we've probably been literally in front of 1 million men over the last 20 years. We're on the road all the time. And even with the pandemic, we're virtually in spaces with hundreds of men, thousands of men. So our work is really about meeting men where they are, connecting the dots of male socialization, that socialization is not only harmful. There's so many wonderful things about being a man, first of all, right? I don't want to not be a man. I really enjoy being a man. I enjoy being a father, but I also want to be the best person that I can be, right? And so there's so many wonderful things, but there's things that are harmful, not only to women, girls, and the queer community, but to men and boys. We're living 6 years less than women. Suicide among men is 3.5 times higher than among women. So there's something wrong with how we're taught to be men.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely true. And the things that we associate, and many of the things that we associate with what it means to be men are just problematic, right? They're either not true, or they're holding up a system of injustice. You just use the metaphor of the refrigerator, and you don't hear the refrigerator unless until you listen to it. But I was thinking about it because I've been listening to my refrigerator lately because there's something wrong with it, and I start to hear this sort of you start to hear a buzz or a vibration, and you go, something's off there, and I think that's important, because I think in some ways, I guess the reason I brought that up is I thought we should talk a bit about often in both the issue of race and gender, the refrigerator's starting to rattle a little bit, and we're talking about it a lot. And I guess since I'm sure we have a lot of people here, so we should talk about this big issue of critical race theory, then the fear of this. An old professor. I wish I could say I wrote this, but an old professor of mine used to have a sign on his door that said the first rule of White Club is you don't talk about White Club, and that makes me. That's what you made me think of. Is that right now we're talking about it because it's rattling, and there's a lot of people saying we need to shut up, we need to go back to the old rules of not talking about it. And I think this applies in whether we're talking about gender, whether we're talking about race, whether it's about any, as you said, both the margins and the margins of the margins. The voices are getting louder, and I think we should talk about that thing. But I do want to say one thing, which is it was the acknowledgement of that rattling refrigerator that made me want to do father figure. And it was noticing that as that refrigerator was rattling, people were so confused and scared about what to make sense of this new conversation about that was becoming so much part of the mainstream, that we were seeing men, especially white men, double down on misogyny, double down on white supremacy, double down on trans and homophobia, and just sort of, it's like they had to grab the old thing because the idea of what's coming that just doesn't make sense to anyone. They don't know how to make sense of it yet.
Yeah, Jordan, you bring up some good points, and you're even in the title of your book, the word feminist, right? We've all been taught that feminist is a bad word, right? But what we're talking about is respecting someone, valuing someone, right? Doesn't mean that it takes away from anything else. And I just want to ask you, did you worry when you put that word in the book, and especially in the title on the cover, that it would alienate some men?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you, when you write a book, there's as there's like multiple things that you go, on the one hand, you've got the message you want to get out that's just coming from your soul or the sky, wherever it comes from. You don't even know. It just kind of feeds through you and you get it out there. But at the same time, you also have to think about things like marketing, and you also have to talk to marketing departments and marketing people, and so there were many long conversations with the folks at Little Brown who were always very supportive of this book. But we took us months to come up with what I knew the main title was going to be Father Figure from the beginning, but what was going to be that subtitle was going to be hard. And I think we talked about doing some things that might be less alienating to cis hetero dudes, but ultimately that kind of scared me that they would just pick, that's what the book is. So I didn't want to lie and try to bait and switch, where this is just a book about being a good parent, and then I was going to sneak my critical gender theory into it. So I wanted to be straightforward. I also wanted to be bold. I wanted to say feminist. I think it is time for men to not be afraid to say it. I mean, there's an argument that we should say pro-feminist instead of feminist, because there's a question about whether or not it's ever possible when you have privilege to give it up, and so can you actually be feminist? But I think if I added pro-feminist, it'd be too many words for a cover. But I totally agree with the argument that it should probably be how to be a pro-feminist man, not how to be a feminist man. But I don't think that semantic difference matters enough to make it if I thought it mattered, I would have done it.
I like it. I think that I think pro-feminist changes it a bit, because I think that dad who is not pro-feminist might pick this up thinking that, oh, let me see what this is about. I have a daughter, because they're going to assume about their daughter, because that's the way into men. The way that we get men to care about women is to go through their heart about the women and girls in their lives, unfortunately, right? Because if we could just talk to them about respecting women, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation. We would have feminist men, right? So I mean, that's the way that we go into when we talk to men, because our socialization, Jordan, part of our socialization is that we are actually taught to distance ourselves from the experiences of women and girls, unless it's about sex. And even the word feminist has taken on this word that seems like it's bad or somehow against men, because our socialization has taught us that if somehow you're for women, that automatically means you're against men. And that's not true, right? Right? That's not true. So I like it the way it is. I think it speaks to the issue. I think it surprises people when they pick it up. And even the issue of privilege, understanding our privilege, because I don't know if it's about, when I think about my male privilege, is it about giving up my privilege or understanding that it operates, and when it operates, addressing it and using that privilege in a way that lifts others up. And then that way I am giving it up. But it's not like I'm just saying I'm putting it down. I'm actually saying, well, whether I want to put it down or not, because whether it's gender privilege or race privilege, we got it whether we want it or not.
Yeah.
Right? When I open the door in a room, my male privilege is waiting for me in the same way that, Jordan, as a white man in America, your white privilege is waiting for you in the room. It's here, right? It's in our socialization. So being able to then address it when there's sexism, that somebody says something sexist, or there's some equity issue that's not happening, and as a man, I then say, I address it. That's being anti-sexist, right? That's where we put it. That doesn't mean that I'm not sexist, because my socialization is always operating, but I'm aware of it, so I can pull it out and I can say, oh, Ted, that's not right. That's not right, because it's all around us. And I would think the same thing is around race or any other dominant group to a marginalized group.
I think that's totally right, and I love that you said it. It's that gets to this idea that it's not an indictment, it's not a judgment of the individual, because even if you don't want your privilege, you can't get rid of your privilege. So no one's getting mad at you for having it. What we are getting mad at you for is not acknowledging it, not thinking about it, and we're inviting you to think a lot more about these things. You said something about going through daughters, going through a father's love for his daughter. And so I sort of have a question for you, because you've been doing this work a lot longer than me. So because one of the things that bothers me is, and as I was writing, I was thinking a lot about this. We had this this girl dad hashtag that went all over Twitter, and this, and it's a whole meme thing, and that's all good. I got no criticism. It's great. Be proud of your daughter. But there was a part of me that also went, you're not feminist just because you love your daughter. You're not even feminist just because you want your daughter to thrive. You got to actually be interested in the larger issue, structural privilege issues, if you want to be feminist. I mean, our former president certainly loved his own daughter. He said it all the time, and he thought she was capable of everything. But I think he was pretty sexist also.
You're right. That doesn't mean, yeah, you're right. And having Black friends doesn't mean you're not racist. You know what I mean? So it's kind of the same thing. So I totally agree with you. And that doesn't mean, so now I do think that men who have daughters see the world a little differently because they have daughters, but that's not about their daughters, see. That's about our boys, because why we see things differently as men who have daughters is that now we're worried about our daughters, right? And why are we worried about our daughters? Because of women in our society? No, because of men in our society. Even with, if there's dads on the call here today and I ask them, when your daughter was two, who have daughters, when your daughter was 2 or she might be 16, has another man ever said something like this to you? You better get your shotgun ready. Every father says, yep. Well, that's not about our daughters. That's about our sons. We're basically saying that you better get your shotgun ready because it's not safe here for her. You better get your shotgun ready because we don't teach boys or men to value women or girls. You better get your shotgun ready because someone needs to protect her. Well, protect her from whom? From men like us. And most men aren't going to do those things that we're worried about happening to our daughters, but we are all silent about those that do. And that's as much of the issue. So when you speak out around feminism and father figures, right? You speak out around respecting women and girls. That's something we that has to resonate with men. That's something we need more of, because what I would like is for me not to have to worry about protecting my daughter, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to worry about that. I'd like to think that the world is safe for her because she's valued, but she's not valued by other men. She's valued by me, like your daughter's valued by you. But we want to spread that. We want to take that value to the rest of the world. That's the only way we're going to stop this thing.
Yeah, I get, one of the things you just made me think of, and it's a great example. I use an example of a book of a chef who once said to me, when the first boy comes over to the house, I'm going to cut off his balls and put it on a pole to warn the other boys. And it always has stuck in my head as what a weird thing to say. But, I've been watching a lot of TV, as we all have probably during pandemic lockdown. And there's all these shows I notice about women who are young girls who get kidnapped. And there's all these shows around rape, around sexual assault. And we have all this messaging that says what you just said, right? That says we have to protect our daughters, right? It says over and over again, the world is an unsafe place for daughters. What there's not, and I try to think about this a lot when I talk to my now 13 and 14-year-old boys, because they're at that age, is a lot of conversation with boys about how to recognize the nuance of sexual behavior so that you can really think, because it is confusing. I want to admit that straight up, right? Right? Like sex is full of weird power dynamics, strange, nuanced ambiguities, and we need the vocabulary. We need to prepare our kids with the vocabulary to be able to recognize where the line between play and rapiness it's right, play and assault, right, and that's, unless we're talking about that, we're not going to be able to solve that problem. Otherwise, we just keep putting it on the girls or on the dads, right, by saying it's not a safe place, be careful for yourself. And we really need to put it on the education. And that's one of the things I like about Book of Dares is that so much of it is about how to start to talk to boys about the things that matter, not just these issues, but not just issues of sex, I should say, although there is a little bit of that, but all the issues that boys don't have the nuanced language to reflect on.
I appreciate that. Yeah, the Book of Dares is 100 ways for boys to be kind, bold, and brave. And it's basically 100 positive challenges. We've kind of taken the concept of dares and flipped it on its head after interviewing 1,000 boys who love the idea of dares, but were also terrified by them. So we really took this kind of man box culture, living on the edge, the risk, and put it into positive challenges. And this is for boys who are basically 8 to 13 years old. And they're in 3 buckets: authenticity, being your full authentic self; healthy masculinity, right? And gender equity and inclusion, and radical inclusion, I really like, as you mentioned earlier. But one of the things that we talk about are boundaries. And to your point around, sex is a confusing thing for teens, right? It can be a confusing thing for adults. But a lot of times, the issue with our boys, and we have a high school and middle school curriculum that we wrote called Live Respect, Coaching Healthy, Respectful Manhood. We wrote it with Scholastic. It's excellent. It's online, free on our website at callstomen.org, right? It's for middle school and high school boys, for those who work with middle school and high school boys, but also for parents. And when we were creating the curriculum, Jordan, we surveyed boys from all around the country, all different demographics, boys who look like boys in your community, boys who look like boys in my community, and we asked them something. These are what we asked high school boys. Can you define consent? And Jordan, only 19% of our boys could define consent. 8 out of 10 could not, right? Which explains a lot. It explains sexual assault on our college campuses. It explains sexual assault in the military. It explains why girls and women between 16 and 24 are at the highest risk for being sexually assaulted. Our boys think no means try harder. Why? Because we don't teach them any different. So even though fathers are working to protect their daughters, we need to be working, just as what you're referring to educating our sons. And then our daughters don't need the protection, right? Yeah. Because the boys are moving around in ways that respect and value them. So when that 5-year-old boy is on the playground and he hits a little girl or pushes her, dad or mom doesn't say, oh, he just likes her. He's just showing he likes her. No, we need to have some clear boundaries here. So I just want to say this one last thing, though, about this piece around consent. We only have one lesson out of the 9 lessons that's on consent. That number went from 19% of boys to 75% of boys understood what consent was. They could define it. So it's not that our boys don't know or aren't capable of learning it. They know it, but we need to have those conversations with them because think about it. We pass down the socialization to our boys that girls are sexual objects. If there's a boy in your high school, think about a freshman at your college, a young man in the community of the people who are watching here today, good kid. His name's John. He's a junior in the high school. He's taking Kathy out for the first time. They're going to a movie, right? Pandemic's lifting. They're going to a movie. John gets on a group text with a couple of his buddies. Now, he's a good kid now, and so are his buddies. He gets on a group text with a couple of his buddies and says, hey, guys, I'm taking Kathy to the movie. They give him some crap for that because they're 17 years old, and that's what you do, and that's cool. But he takes her to the movie, takes her home. He's a perfect gentleman. He gets back on the group text and says, hey, guys, I'm back. Is the first thing those boys ask him is, how was the movie? No. Where did they learn that from?
It's worse than you're saying. Let's be honest. The first thing they're going to ask is, did you hit that? There's going to be all this violent language.
That's right. It's going to be, so it's not only about sexual objectification, but it's also about the violence, because they might say, hit that, smash it, beat it up. There's all kinds of language. So that they're 17 years old. They're good kids. They don't even know what they're saying. But here we are. And that man box, that term that we've coined it called to men, that talks about the male socialization. That man box, the glue that keeps the man box together is homophobia and heterosexism. And speaking of the man box and male socialization, how do you approach socialization in father figures?
Look, I love that man box concept. But what I was trying to get at in father figure was the way that fathers stand on the front lines of setting up that man box culture. I wanted to unpack that. I wanted to help show dads how they are socializing, even at times when they don't mean to. And they think they don't. Most dads you talk to, they'll say things like, I treat all my kids the same. But I wanted to show how certain thought patterns, how certain everyday behaviors, little everyday routines end up constructing that man box. And one of the things that I pointed out and do a lot on in father figure is what I call this narrative of murderous ascendancy. And that's the sort of hero story, right? That the hero son has to conquer the father king and take over the throne, right? And we have this built in to our psychology, the way we talk about psychology as if it's essential. It's not essential, okay? Freud tried to tell everyone it was essential. He just skipped the fact that there's a million other myths about fathers and sons that don't involve killing, right? That don't involve battle. He took out all the other ones and just kept the one that maybe reflected his own relationship. I don't know, but we still buy that, right? And now we've even started to take it into a new level. I know some people hear me say Freud and go, well, he's debunked one. He's as much as debunked as he is, he's still very present. But then you take it another step, which is even in neuroscience now, we're starting to tell the same story. We're trying to say hardwired for recklessness and rebellion. No, they're not hardwired for recklessness and rebellion. There are things that happen to the brain that make kids maybe a little bit recklessness, but rebellion is because we've told them that's what it means to be a man. They have to get in that fight against their father for status, against the dominant boys at school. And the way we do that, as you said, is always through feminizing, right? And because we have such a binary way of thinking about gender, such a binary way of thinking about sexuality, even the homophobia is considered feminizing, right? It's considered you're not man enough, right? You're not, it's like you don't have a penis, right? Or because you are attracted to men, therefore you're like a girl. That's the biggest insult you can make to a boy these days, and we haven't gotten rid of it. And that fathers are continuing to reinforce that even when they don't mean to. And that's what, when I think about how father figure is an invitation, not an indictment, that's what it is. I know there's a million well-meaning dads out there. I know that almost all of them are well-meaning. And I don't think they've realized how the things that they think that they're doing to try to be, just like you said, with the example of daughters, right? To care and to protect and to be custodial and to love and to care for their families, but at the same time, they're reinforcing the things that create a man box and the things that create a gender subjugation, I should say a cisgender subjugation, which again, just back to that, we both put our pronouns there because we still think of it as binary cisgender, which means everybody else is invisible if you don't fit into one of those categories. The margins are the margins.
That's right. You bring up so much. Again, I'm just jotting down some things because I want to feed them back to you because of what you said. Now, feminizing, right? Because we're on this remote control, man, and we just keep passing it down from one generation to the next. That's why those 17-year-old boys, John's friends, when he was going to the movies, they respond because they learned it from men like us, men in their community, not men who are going to go out and rape or beat up a woman. They're talking about the men in their lives. We're giving them these messages in different ways. When we say things like to our 6-year-old son, or you're a coach at the baseball field, they say, son, you have to throw harder than that. You throw like everyone knows the answer to that. It doesn't mean you believe it, but you know the answer. So you've been socialized the same way. So, and girls still just fine, by the way. But what does that little 6-year-old boy leave that interaction with that man he's looking up to and wants his approval from? Does he leave that interaction thinking that girls are equal to him or less than him? Less than, how can he not? And we do these things everywhere we go. You talk about the murderous ascendance. Is that what you call it?
Murderous ascendancy. Yeah, like ascend the throne.
Yeah. And even when we're watching things with children, with our kids, it's good to have conversations with them. Like I think about all the empowerment that's happening with women on television. You think about the Marvel with like Wonder Woman, right? Well, that's Justice League with Wonder Woman, right? And a question I might have if I'm watching Wonder Woman with a boy is, why does she fight with tights on and no armor? Everybody else has armor. You know what I mean? Like, what do you think that's about, right? So that there's still, even when women are being elevated to strength and power in these definitions that we define as strength and power, there's an objectification still, even within that. And so it's all within us, as you mentioned before. It's in the in the images and the messages we get through our society. So I really appreciate it. And murderous ascendancy. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to add one other thing into that, which is that when we talk about the feminizing, when we talk about the homophobia and the misogyny that's at the core of how men put each other down and jockey for status. One of the things I think that we don't even realize we do, that I've been thinking a lot about lately, is just the very idea of feeling emasculated is reinforcing this idea that there's something less about not having a penis.
Right. And, and it's harmful for men. We mentioned a little bit earlier, we're dying 6 years earlier than women because a number of reasons, right? We're not asking for help because asking for help is a sign of weakness. Who asks for help? Women need help. Men aren't supposed to need help. Right. We're supposed to go help women, right? So it's all connected. So it removes us from our full authenticity as well, right? It took me for 10 years of my marriage, Jordan, I would bring flowers home every week or two for my wife. She would like it. If her girlfriends were over, they'd say, 10 years later, he's bringing flowers, what a great guy, all that kind of stuff. But honestly, Jordan, if I didn't bring flowers home, she wasn't saying, where are the flowers? She wasn't saying, you don't love me anymore. When I didn't bring flowers home, you know who missed the flowers? I missed the flower. You see my peonies over my shoulder? But it took me 10 years to accept that, wait, I like the way they smell when I come in the house. I like the colors. The flowers weren't for her, they're for me. But I brought it in under that kind of disguise of, men aren't supposed to want flowers. You bring them in for a woman. And every man has something like that in their life that they didn't pursue or they don't do because it's outside of this man box. It's in a gender norm that isn't supposed to be who they are, these rigid notions of manhood. And it's killing us. Literally, it's killing us,
Yeah, it absolutely is. Now, what I wanted to ask you about is I want to talk a bit about what they call gender essentialism, right? The idea that those man box traits, or we could use the women ones, but let's stick with the man box, right? This idea that these man box traits are somehow established either by biology or sometimes it's by mythology. I guess you wouldn't consider it by mythology if you believed it, right? Right? You either go it's biblically ordained, or that's how it's been since the beginning of time, or we have an evolutionary record that shows that it's always been this way, or you try to make a biological argument that it's that this is what testosterone does, and I just spent 2 years looking at all the science and all. I could tell you it's all been debunked, but I think we should talk a bit about that, the way that these origin stories get used to make the current moment, our current conventions seem unquestionable.
Right. So they get used and we just keep passing them down without interruption as if it's, law. And
right.
The bottom line is, well, we talk about the man box, and let me just describe it a little bit. People, I'm sure, understand what the man box is, but we're talking about not asking for help, being in charge, right? Not showing fear or weakness, not expressing emotions except for anger, right? Though anger is covering up hurt, disappointment, pain. Most of it's that stuff. But we don't get to share that, because when we're that little boy, we're told to suck it up, or man up, or stop crying. That's where that becomes anger. It gets expressed, and it becomes self-destructive, and it can be just destructive to other folks also. When you look at gun violence and shootings, it's clear these are people who are isolated, feel left out, and are trying to establish power based on this man box. That women and girls are seen as having less value than men and girls. Women and girls are seen as having less value than men and boys. Women are the property of men. Girls are sexual objects. Women and girls are sexual objects. So when we talk about, is it biological? No, it's embedded in our socialization, not in our DNA. It's not we're not predetermined to be this way. It's a learned behavior, and it can be unlearned. But the messages we're getting throughout our entire society have all of this woven within it. So it's really hard to get away from it. Even with my children, who we're having these conversations, as I'm sure with yours, all the time around gender, race, all this stuff. But then they go out to the world and they're getting these other messages as well. So I'm addressing homophobia and heterosexism, even though we have 2 queer kids in the household and we're dealing with these conversations. I have kids who are coming back from the world still with the cisgender kids in our home, still with certain attitudes and beliefs that we have to it's like giving the kids a tune-up, right? They come home, I just adjusted everything, now they come back home, I gotta give them another tune-up, it's gotta change this, alter that, so forth, so on.
Well, that should be easy, because as a man, obviously you're biologically fit to be a mechanic, right? So
oh man,
I'm joking for anyone watching. That was a joke about the idea that men are better with cars.
So let me ask you something. I know we're coming up against time, but I did want to stay with essentialism and stereotypes and ask you, in father's figures, you talk a lot about the history of gender roles and how they've changed and varied over time. You want to just share a little bit about that with our audience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was one of the things I wanted to do, was because I kept hearing all the people say things like, this is how it's always been, or, how are you going to undo thousands of years of socialization? And while there has absolutely been socialization of one sort or the other, and there probably always will be, the idea that the socialization has always been the same is not true. The idea that every patriarchal society from the beginning of time looked the same is just nonsense. If you go this is true about almost all forms of subjugation and dominance. Is they start at a certain historical moment, they develop for a variety of different reasons, whether they're economic or technological or sometimes just cultural. They develop, and then what happens is these stories get designed that try to tell us that they've been there since the beginning of time, because then again, you don't have to talk about it. One of the things, if you think about, we have a way of thinking about what slavery is. That's because of what slavery looked like in America when the colonists were here in America, which we should talk about as it's almost Juneteenth. But if you go back to ancient Greece, their version of slavery was a very different version of slavery. It was probably closer to what it looks like to work at Walmart right now, the service industry, right? It was. We'll make sure you have just enough to eat, and you'll work sort of like an indentured servant. But it was not whipping. And I mean, I'm sure there were some terrible bosses, as there still are, right? But that wasn't it. Same thing with gender, right? So yes, there has been lots of inequality. But the inequality prior to the Industrial Revolution, prior to the Middle Ages, was not actually based on gender. It was based on, were you a male property owner? If you were an aristocratic male property owner, then you were superior, and everyone else, male, female, whatever they were considered nothing. But now we've turned it into a very binary gender division, which is where we are right now. And then we pretend that's what it's always has. Even the idea of homemakers and breadwinners, that the men were out to work and the women were home in the kitchen. So wrong, not historical at all. One, there weren't even kitchens. It was a hut with a fire in the middle. So, but even if you say she was going to tend the hut with the fire in the middle, it's just not true. Nobody was ever able to do that. Everybody had to work. We put the kids to work as soon as we could before the industrialization. This idea of separating male, female, work, nurture, that's an industrial era invention. And that may have made sense at the beginning of the industrial era. I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm not going to pretend to judge what's best for those people at that time. What I know is that we are still believing in things like that, and we're letting genitals decide who does the laundry and who does the cooking and who writes the checks and who drives the car. And it doesn't make any sense for our modern world. And not only does it not make sense, it's really harmful for a lot of people in our modern world.
It really is. And, you know, COVID has exposed so much also with equity at home.
Yeah.
That, you know, there's many women who haven't been able to go back to work because they've had to be here. They had to be home with their children. And even in the most aware and woke households, you know, still male privilege kind of tips the balance, you know what I mean? So there's a lot to do there. And in father figures,
wait, you said kind of. It's not
yeah,
even.
it does.
It does.
And, you know, in father figures, you tackle a lot of that, and you do it in a way that, again, does not indict men, but invites men to the conversation. Because I think that if men know better, they'll do better. That's been my experience. And I just like to ask you, as I know we're getting close on time, but I want to ask you, where do you see optimism and hope for the future?
Oh, well, I don't know if I see optimism and hope for the future because of the pandemic. I certainly have it. But when you ask me about, I mean, I know there's a lot of us talking about, some people call it a she-cession, right? The recession as the women leaving the workforce, the recognition of it. I'll believe that in a few years if we start to see a change, because I started writing this book before the pandemic, and everything that came out and they wrote articles about, I had already read data about. So, yes, we got a lot of New York Times articles about it, and that's a good thing, but we'll see if it makes a change before we get optimistic about it. But where I am optimistic about is Gen Z. I mean, I'm a college professor. I am in the classroom all the time. I have kids of my own, and I have never, I mean, this generation is so kind and so compassionate and so full of vigor for social justice. I mean, we get a lot in the media that says we have coddled kids, right? It's just not. As a college professor, I'm going to speak with authority here, and I don't mean because I'm a college professor I have authority. I mean because I interact with 18 to 24-year-olds all the time, and they will stand up. Even the one who looks like he's the most conservative straight white dude you've ever met, he will stand up and go, "Hey, professor, you can't talk to that student that they don't even know that way. That is not okay." I never would have had the guts at that age to stand up to the authority adults in my life and tell them that I'm calling out their injustices. So the idea that we keep casting this as fear of conflict, as coddled kids who don't want to deal with discomfort, is just crazy. They have so much guts, and those guts are all towards taking care of other people. So I am so optimistic when I look at them. I just hope we don't let our angry, partisan, political nonsense suck it out of them. Yeah.
There's that part for sure. And I would agree with you that the kids today are responding differently. They have a different perspective. They see things differently. They're much more about inclusion and belonging, that everyone belongs, no matter what your differences are and what they might look like. So I would agree with you. I see that with my own children in my community, and I see it. I teach a class at John Jay, and I see it also there, that it's a different conversation, and I do have hope for them.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. The book's amazing. I recommend everyone get it. It's Father's Day coming up. Get it for a man in your life as well.
Yeah, and get the book of dares too. So give that to the man so he can give it to his son.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. Thank both of you so much for this. This has been wonderful. And I have to agree with both of you. Buy Father Figure, buy Book of Dares. They're both available from Book Passage. You can buy them online at bookpassage.com. You can call the store. You can come into the store. We're open. We have both books, and they're both amazing. They're coming at a perfect time right now. This has been such an important conversation, and I want to thank both of you so much for being here and for having this conversation and for bringing this to everybody. It's truly, truly important stuff to talk about, and I think that it's amazing to have you guys here and just sharing this with everyone. So thank you both so much for that.
Thank you, Zach.
And
thank you, Zach. Thanks so much for hosting us.
Yeah, and thank you everyone who's watching this. Again, subscribe to our YouTube channel to not miss any of our upcoming events, and we'll see you all next time. But again, thank you all, everyone, and thank you for watching.